Thank you to the organizers for including this presentation in this conference. The visible inclusion of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, and other gender non-conforming persons as part of the Caribbean, SASOD at CARIFESTA 10. The first invocation I'm making is to them two men. An artist showed me a photograph of four men at the CARIFESTA in 1972, four or five men, I think. And in that photograph, he said, them two men, the desert, they're homosexual. And I think about those two men and all of the others in the Caribbean who would have participated in the Caribbean cultural life, but had to do so at expense of being their authentic selves, even as they produced. This presentation is based on my work with SASOD and, from 2003 to 2012 when that was the only time I was a member. The call for papers stimulated remembering because I'd forgotten a lot of this in the time, in the years that have passed since, and all of the events since then. And therefore, I had to dig into personal archives of emails and so on to pull out some of the information. This presentation is done to remember that it is for citizens to find ways to demand inclusion and participation when the governments of the Caribbean want to exclude. I'd like to acknowledge the other workers, including the late Namila Baines Henry, Stacey Gomes, Eulalie Verbeke, Ryan Rollins, Jermaine Grant, Joel Simpson, and Mark Ross, and to the donors of the books and films, the donors of time, and the managers of the venues which were used for the events. So the questions I want to answer in no particular order. Who wanted LGBTIQ plus inclusion at CARIFEST 10? Why did they want it? What was planned? How did it turn out? And what lessons do we have about building our Caribbean? To understand, of course, that SASOD's work in including the arts as part of raising visibility of LGBTIQ plus citizens comes on a short, this is just some of the history. In 1973, Robert Noreen produced After the Rain at Theatre Guild. In 1992, the artist in direct support produced One of Our Sons is Missing by Godfrey Seeley. Desiree Gillett said, there were 50 persons the first production, and then later on in December 2015, and when it was shown back, there was a packed house with people crying. Then there were these fashion shows and pageants held in Leopold Street and other venues, quiet venues. In 2005, SASA started its LGBT Film Festival. So the theme was selected, there was a brainstorming, and in a letter to the editor of Stabrook News, the SASA noted that even as there was opposition to SASA's work, including the picketing and so on, that there was support and that there were people who believed that Guyana and the Caribbean could be a more tolerant place which recognizes all kinds of diversity. And thus they said that SASA has answered the call to join in CARIFESTA 10 and is organizing this French. And this participation is a tribute to Guyanese and Caribbean people who have rejected the notion of our region as a homophobic place and who are determined to change that perception and recognize that Caribbean diversity also includes respect for diversity in sexual orientation and gender identity. What was planned? There was a book launch, there was a party, there was a rainbow night, and then there was also a side event which wasn't happening, which was Operation Restoration, called by his Way Out Ministries, which was happening. Then another event called Interactions until the final date was cancelled due to the Rex Nettleford workshop. There was also the film festival. And these are the films that were shown from different parts of the Caribbean. And I have the details in the archive, which is in the description of this video on YouTube. We have an archive, the Caribbean Era, an archive on the Digital Library of the Caribbean. Colin Robinson, poet, activist, citizen, and dreamer. He then shared his thoughts about CARIFESTA, SASOD CARIFESTA. Colin Robinson wrote to us when he saw our plans. He wrote, the Caribbean has a long history of imagining same sex desire and gender transgression in our music, literature, and visual art. While we have not always been imagined or in our full humanity, or through our own imaginations, or in roles other than gender gestures, that imagining has not always been trapped in the prism of violence or the drumbeat of genocide. What are the words you do not yet have? Grenadian descended lesbian Audre Lorde asked in The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action. Colin continues, imagination, I believe, is as fundamental to liberation as power is. How are those of us who have been born into independent citizenship imagining the Caribbean we will leave our futures? What is powerful about CARIFESTA is that it celebrates the richness, the resilience, the diversity, and the skillfulness of Caribbean imagination. What is similarly powerful about SASOD's cultural project of illuminating the Caribbeanness of same-sex desire in the context of CARIFESTA is how it prevents our forgetfulness or ignorance of how sexual and gender diversity have often been complicated and sometimes seamless aspects of the incredible kalaloo that is Caribbean cultural expression and vibrant parts of the experience and news of our many artists. SASOD at CARIFESTA 10 highlights some distinctly GLBT identified voices and visions. It continues, it promotes the best tradition of dialogue about transformation, the role of culture in it. It documents how power shapes culture. And finally, it demonstrates the agency of Caribbean communities to create cultural expression of our liberation. Colin Robinson joined the launch of our Caribbean, that's the book, via phone. Helen Clanaris from the Bahamas happened to be present at the launch. Here's Thomas Glave, the editor, explaining at UWI St. Augustine in 2010 a little bit about the project.
And writers and so on. There are actually 37 writers in the book from 14 different Caribbean nations. And they span a variety of languages, and all of which have been translated for the purposes of this book into English. And quite a few Trinidadians in the book. And the project itself, I talked about in the introduction, I said to a few classes here at UWI, took about 5.5 years, I think, from the initial conception to the actual ending, to the actual publication of the book. Trying very hard to reach people across the Caribbean in all sorts of locations to try to get as broad a perspective and variety of people as possible who were not only necessarily known as writers already, but people who also were involved in activism and in community organizing and lived in places that might not have been as visible to someone looking for writers for a project like this. And I remain very, very grateful to all the writers who worked so hard to make this book happen and to come together, because it was a project that was indeed, from the very beginning, very demanding, and I think I didn't realize how impossible it was until I realized how possible it was.
And it is in this spirit of our Caribbean that we look at the Caribbean countries which SASOD was able to represent at CARIFESTA 10. There were 15 countries, and this is the map of the LGBT voices that were there. So how did the media tell our story? Remember, all of this was happening just before social media became available and before wide internet usage. The journalist from NCN did an interview, and then she quietly told me that it was not aired due to the objection of a senior member of the CARIFESTA Secretariat. I'm pretty sure it was not the director, Paloma Mohammed. The Daily Herald of St. Martin, 30th July 2008, carried an article. The Starbuck News also carried our letter to the editor. They did an article about the book launch. And then in their article about the main CARIFESTA Film Festival, they, Andrea Haynes also told the story about our mini film festival, and perhaps in this way connecting our parallel event with the main CARIFESTA event. There was also another article by Eileen Cox about the Caymanian play Frank Mafield's One Black, One White, which was directed by Henry Mutu. And in that article, Eileen Cox said that, it seems as though some of the members of the audience were uncomfortable with the implications of homosexuality. The only other perhaps official CARIFESTA acknowledgement of the diversity in the Caribbean, of sexual and gender diversity in the Caribbean is when one of the dub poets at the official closing ceremony said that he don't deal with funny boys and funny girls and boys who wear jelly curls. So what are some of the lessons and the dreams from this festival? That the impossible can be possible as we contemplate fringe festivals for those excluded from the Caribbean state. That the arts and festivals are necessary for visibility and participation of all of those Caribbean citizens who feel excluded from Caribbean citizenship and recognition. And that really truly archives are important as we deal with this work to build the Caribbean. And that community and other groups who are doing social justice work, we're so caught up in the moment that we forget that there's going to be a future when this work is important. It is as a result of this conference, for example, that I realized I had to create an item about this SASOD CARIFESTA 10 on the digital library of the Caribbean Ireland collection there, in which you put, all these newspaper clippings and so. Because of course, the official CARICOM CARIFESTA archive will not be including this. And as we continue and we talk about dreams, Rainbow Night was the night when everyone participated and shared. And Joel Simpson, in reporting about that night, we kept going, and the program kept flowing for nearly 3 hours. The energy, warmth, ideas, bonds, possibilities from Rainbow Night seem endless. It was a night to dream again that things can happen, change for the better. That all is not lost, that it is not an impossible dream, and we could dare to dream again. And as we look at these pictures here from the Pride Parade in 2002, these wonderful designs from Maxie Williams, who is here also walking on stilts as part of the Equal Guyana in that Pride Parade. We recognize that citizenship belongs to LGBTIQ plus Caribbean citizens. And whether the CARIFESTA or those who organize CARIFESTA want to or not, that LGBTQI plus citizens will be part of the Caribbean. Thank you very much.